Hello and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. My name is Tom Luongo and we have a lot to talk about. This is episode 124. And I have with me today a longtime correspondent. He and I have chatted back and forth via email for years. It's Chris Sullivan, CEO and portfolio manager for Hyperion Decimus. This is a blockchain hedge fund style company. And Chris and I have been, intrigued about what's been going on with FTX, and I know that in episode 123, my partner Dexter White and I did what we thought was a quick and dirty, I guess Dexter called it fan fiction layout of what he thought was going on with FTX, and I threw my color onto it. And Chris reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think we got another angle on this," and so just want to kind of update where we are a week and a half to almost 2 weeks later now to see where things are. Chris, thank you for coming on the show. Welcome. All that happy jazz. How are you?
I'm alive and grateful to be so. Living to fight another day. But Tom, huge fan of your work. Obviously, you're a gentleman and a scholar, and we're all honored to be exposed to the work. So please keep it going. So,
gentlemen, I'll quibble about, but
well, we'll take what we get.
I don't know what version of you've seen publicly, but gentleman doesn't normally come to.
Well, I've watched some of the freedom and I think it was the event in New Orleans. That was phenomenal. That speech was phenomenal. So
cool. Thank
you.
That was
I mean, scholar maybe is even a better compliment to gentlemen.
Fair enough. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but I look at whenever something like FTX happens, the first thing I do is I immediately go to who, what, where, and why. Right? I never look at not even like the what. I care more about the who and the why, because the what we know about. Right? This thing blew up. Right, what $16 billion of crypto is vaporized, maybe even more. God knows what's coming next, right? But for me, it's almost always I'm like I have to go directly to the root. I'm always trying to strike the root, classic kind of libertarian, Austro-libertarian perspective. Strike the root, figure out what's going on. I'm a root cause analysis kind of guy, and how does this fit in the the timing and everything else? And so this thing gets blown up on election night. And I listen to various people talk, and I'm like, oh, this is probably what this is. My spidey sense starts to tingle, and things go on. So, and Dexter and I did our thing, and we, he kind of went through it, and called FTX basically a Ponzi vacuum or a Ponzi Hoover, hoovering up all the other Ponzi's within the crypto space as opposed to the Bitcoin space, which are two completely different things. And I said, yeah, and I'm looking at the incentives of who would blow this up and the why. And the first thing I would think of is, well, hey, if I'm the Federal Reserve and I'm, under the worst political pressure that I've ever been in my entire career, in the history of the Fed, I'm under attack from all sides because I'm raising interest rates like, nobody's business. And we'll, quite quibble about why they're doing that. It seems perfectly reasonable to me to assume that the Fed is hostile to dollar substitutes, and certainly offshore dollar substitutes, which is part of what I've been screaming about for a year and a half. So to me, it seems pretty obvious that that's where we would start, even if that's not the end of the story. That's certainly the most likely outcome here. So I don't know if you agree with me on this or not. So let's throw it out there. So what have you got?
I'm always a weight of the evidence, right? And I can't, with that evidence or fact pattern that we're aware of, I can't refute you, to the end of time here on that year and a half assumption that the Fed's going rogue against other central banks, right? Definitely that's possible. Honestly, as an American, we probably hope that they're going to do that. What you are 1,000% correct on is any substitute for the quasi-government issued and central bank controlled means of transacting. I won't even call it a currency because it's not even worthy of that, to be honest. If you look at the history of fiat, they always end the same. The geopolitical, the economic is all lined up exactly how it has done it in all of the major, previous 6 cycles that we've gone from, inflation to zero, and we're arguably already through zero. Tom, there's while you've been alive, 97% of the purchasing power is gone.
Yeah.
So, the other 2 or 3, who gives a shit, right? So, it's already zero. Like the fact that we are still in this system which again is why Bitcoin even was birthed, which has a really interesting 40-year history schematic, which is quite beautiful. And I can get into that later. But why we're in a system where, all right, we're gonna depress rates to push up asset prices. And then, all right, the economy finally can, live off wealth effect, et cetera. Then you hire people get a few months or quarters of a little bit higher earnings. And then, all right, we're going to raise rates to go fight what we just created and keep doing that over and over and over again the last 100 years. It's just worse than the definition of insanity, right?
Agreed.
The fact that 7 billion people are part of that system, right? Countries left without central banks, is just sad and pathetic. So noting that they're going to do like all of the power structures at the end of their reigns, they're going to do whatever they can to hold on to their power, because no one's going to give up power willingly.
Of course not.
And of course, if they were the only actor here, it'd be easier to understand, right? Because the history of how the LME and CME have papered over commodities markets. It's distorted the living Christ out of metals, softs, and meats. And then
oil and everything else that goes along with it. Everything. Right. The entire commodity space is a fiction.
It is entirely fiction. It's there's the backdoor stuff. Like if we get into nickel, what happened earlier this year on nickel, JP Morgan and the bullion banks were bankrupt, insolvent off of one overly shorted trade. What did they do? They pulled a GameStop like Robinhood and Citadel did, and said, okay, you hedge funds, you investors that were long that because of the trend and the breakout and the momentum, or you producers who were trying to accelerate your earnings on the trend, or even try and hedge, we're going to take your 60% that you were up and fund our accounts so we don't go BK. Well, that's actually way more sinister and egregious than what just happened with the FTX debacle, right? It really is. And then you can point to some of the stocks, you can point to nickel, and then all of the metals there. I believe the current number is greater than 20 times the amount of paper versus spot gold. I think it's 24 to be current.
Is it only that little? Because I remember at one point it was well over 100.
It was, I think they pulled back recently and it's hard to see the rolls, right? Sure. Because you're really not given transparency, which is honestly like why my team and myself devoted our career and our expertise to blockchain-based investments, because we thought that was a better way to express our thesis, express our risk management, because we're cool with losing when we're wrong, Tom. Like that, right. You can't win everything. Like if you're winning 70% of the time, you're crushed.
If you're batting 65% in the markets, you're a rock star.
Yeah, and that's great, and you can deliver that to your friends, clients, and family. Amazing. But we didn't, like, having gone through. Oh wait, I was at Morgan Stanley when that was going down. You literally realize, wait a minute, this is this hyper financialized piece of shit that nobody knows the inner workings of anything. And then, oh, by the way, there's fraud, corruption, collusion on top of that, all to just siphon money off of the productive activities of an economy. That is what the modern financial markets are. And so we just didn't want to have anything to do with it. Finally got the balls to, in 2018, go professional with running a hedge fund after being invested for a few years before that. And the thing that I want to highlight for your listeners here is that what they're alleging that FTX did is 100% auditable by the technology.
Right.
So there should be zero speculation. Once, when and if this is fully disclosed and papered and analyzed properly by whoever, lawyers, regulators, auditors, accountants, right. I don't really care who does it. I could do it. Right. This isn't that hard.
Right.
Because there's a huge discrepancy from what they allegedly had on their balance sheet upon filing and what allegedly occurred from 100 to 0. Right. So because it's on chain, right, different than when you're looking at investing in traditional assets like stocks, bonds, whatever, the brokerage houses there are subject to two hyper centralized business models. One is clearing through DTC, which is literally like 90+% of stocks and bonds. They're T plus 1, 2, 3. So it shows up in your account and it's not there. That's not the same thing as crypto, right? Bitcoin is 10 minutes to confirm the chain. Others are shorter. Some is as soon as seconds, like Avalanche, with a very fast finality. Right. So if I'm a user of FTX, full disclosure, myself and my team did our due diligence when they started, did it again in 2020, did it again in 2021. Not that we're experts at anything, but there were a lot of red flags and holes in both the legal structure, the KYC AML, and then certainly the tech.
Right.
And our team is pretty uniquely skilled at tech in both UI and GUI software development, algorithmic development, and HFT trading. That's what we did in traditional space.
Mhm.
So we can underwrite that, as good or better than most, and none of that passed the past muster. It just didn't.
Right.
And then what we know they did, very similar to what a lot of the brokerage firms in TradFi do, is that you create an omnibus wallet infrastructure.
Right.
Well, I'm not okay with that. So I use Interactive Brokers because it's segregated,
Mhm.
right? My assets it's one of the few brokerage houses that does that for stocks and bonds, right?
Right.
So noting that those are technological differentials, what the facts are as far as where the money go, what wallets did it go to, which assets left, all of that is transparent and audible and should immediately be disclosed by any court. I think it's in Delaware now.
Mhm.
That gets a hand on this stuff. And we as the public should not tolerate anything less than that.
I agree.
Every cent is
Yeah.
traceable.
Well, that's the whole point of what's one of the whole point of crypto, or at least of blockchain, right? And it's the thing they're all threatening us with, with tax compliance and everything else, right? I mean, like this is, it like chain analysis is only, utilized to its fullest degree when they're looking for your money. But when they steal your money, oh well, no, we can't find all of it. Like,
Right.
What else is new? I mean, this is the way the situation has always been. And interesting. Before you and I started recording, you brought up MF Global and what happened there, and it's just it's funny. Like it's the same thing, right? At the end of the day, they backdoored the money out. It wound up in JP Morgan's London office, which doesn't have, has no. If I remember correctly, the issue was that they could rehypothecate infinitely because it was all in there. And then when the money went away, I haven't thought about MF Global in 14 years, but I remember just enough of what happened there to recall it, from memory. So, the money was vaporized, it was gone. Corzine had, sent the money out and it never came up. But it's basically the same thing as what Sam Bankster-Fraud did. Now, the fascinating part about this, and I think I mentioned this either in the podcast with Dexter, but it's interesting that when the Enron auditor looks at a company's books and says, "Wow, what did you guys do?" That should tell you something, that there's something there's something. It's not just rotten. Because this thing's clearly, when I look at who this guy was involved with, and you do the big backup picture and say, well, who is this guy? Where did this come from? Right? He's just Elizabeth Holmes 2.0, and
like 9.0.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just
because you've got,
and she's just another one. She's just John Corzine 6.0, whatever. It's always the same story over and over and over again, which is that you get real heavy hitters, backing a project that is clearly fraud, and you give it the imprimatur of it being real because, well, in this case, James Mattis and George was the former Secretary of State George Shultz and others were behind Theranos. So these guys aren't morons, like they're smart people, right? Like, I do think the tyranny of the expert. Like, I'm just waiting for find out, what hedge fund or what companies Anthony Fauci is is invested in, right?
I mean, he's getting royalties on the fake vaxes, obviously.
Of course.
But and how that's not required to be disclosed is just unbelievable. But karma will take care of most people in these situations where it's egregious evil and fraud. But
because as I remember, we were both like long guillotines and rope makers. That's what karma is for these people, like ultimately at the end of the day. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I sympathize with those who are getting a lot of health effects and injuries from what was not sold to them properly.
Right.
as far as a preventative or reduction, but I'm not qualified to really talk more about that than just that surface level. But I do think it just speaks to the fraud, waste, and abuse that's permeating across the whole planet, whether it's the World Economic Forum push to global communism, whether it's just the corruption at your local politicians levels, whether the school boards. All of this is a byproduct of fiat. Honest to God, it's a byproduct of fiat. And I can't help but point out, like, as more and more, because the wallets are all skyrocketing, new wallets buying Bitcoin, transaction volume, the tech, it's almost there where another 2-3 years, it could replace the whole damn system. So this is timely, it timed with the election, timed with a moment where, wait a minute, the correlation against equities is reduced. And you've just got this setup where everybody is ready to rock in terms of allocating, working. I honestly think the best people and best talent in the planet is in the blockchain space.
All right. So I'm going to back you up just a second. I want you to explain that, because a lot of people don't know about it. I've seen some charts on this stuff, but I don't even look at it very closely, which is that there has always been a strong correlation between Bitcoin price and like the NASDAQ tech stocks. So go into that and tell me why you think that was. It sounds like it was, in your mind, a proximate cause of something.
Yeah. So it's statistical. So it spent a lot of years without it. Right. When eyes were on it, beginning in 1819, there was correlation to essentially the bazooka money flows, right? Because it was just another tradable asset that could get money. That's how and why that correlation existed. 2019 had almost no correlation. And you had, right now, you actually have very low correlation. It's below 0.51. But essentially, why I pointed that out was twofold. The media made people think that it was just like NASDAQ times 3.5 beta, right? That's how they sold. Oh, why would you even allocate? There's no diversification. Well, I could argue that, well, from a capital efficiency perspective, if I'm going to have $1 in NASDAQ and this is 3.5 times the volatility and upside, why would I not put that $1 there or 50 cents there, right? So I can argue both sides of how.
And then put 50 cents in T-bills.
Well, and now there's still negative yield though, Tom. So I can't. Negative real yield. So
of course,
and I don't support. I mean, the Treasury market and Social Security at all is the mother of all Ponzi schemes.
Of course, it is.
And in crypto, like SBF wasn't really a Ponzi because it was just out and out theft and fraud. He wasn't. Tom, I'm giving you 15% every year with somebody else's new money coming in. That's not what was being done. And honestly, from the minutia side, we don't know exactly how the customer deposited crypto assets, which were then collateralized with dollar-backed or stablecoin-backed loans, left their wallets into, Alameda-controlled or SBF, FTX-controlled wallets. Like that, that movement needs to be articulated down to the penny. And they had dozens of tokens on there, so it's not. Bitneath will be the large portion of that in dollar terms, but there's a lot of different stuff on there, and all of it is trackable. And I hope that we're going to see that soon. And I think it's fun that you and I are talking on a day where there was a phone call earlier today, interview, and a glorified, I don't even know what to call this New York Times event, but if you look at who is there, they may not be people you'd have a beer with, Tom.
None of those people are people you have a beer with.
No,
that New York Times event is literally Davos 2.0 for 2022. I mean, when you have Janet Yellen and Zelensky and SPF and Mark Zuckerberg and you have all the only people who aren't there are Schwab, Soros, and the rest of them to give it the imprimatur of European communism. But so this is the hyper financialized, the hyper financialized Wall Street casino version of Davos. But you'll notice who's not there. I mean, you mentioned JP Morgan earlier. You mentioned that it's like I don't see Jamie Dimon on the list. I don't see the CEO of Wells on the list. I don't see the CEO of I don't see anybody big over at Citigroup or anywhere else. Those guys, they're not there. I don't see Jerome Powell or even an undersecretary for the Fed or an assistant director over at the Minneapolis Fed or something. I see Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, who's clearly as Davos gets. Like, one of the problems that I fundamentally have with the way, all of us who despise fiat, despise the Fed, despise fractional reserve banking and a corrupt money which begets a corrupt society and all of this stuff, is the fact that the structure of the market has changed in the last few years, because we're looking at the incentives of the people who architected this system. This system is breaking down, and now the cartel itself that extracted all this wealth for all these years is now turning on each other. Because at the end of every cartel, when someone always breaks with the cartel because the cartel no longer serves their purposes. So it doesn't matter who it is. We can talk about OPEC. We can talk about the labor unions. We can talk about any other cartelization, any other cartelized market you've ever studied in history. It always works out the same way. It's a fundamental. This is a fundamental critique of the cartelization of any industry. And so at some point it will fail. The cartel will, and someone is going to leave the cartel. So now the question is, who's left the cartel? And my analysis, my read of the situation, it's very clear that the Fed has. Now, is the Fed doing it for our reason, for the same reasons that you and I would do it? No, of course not. But it's very clear that Jerome Powell is not on board with bankrupting the world and inflating all the unfunded liabilities away in the service of climate change, to foster the dreams of a bunch of old neo-colonial and neo-feudal European shitbags. It's not that hard, people. It's just not that hard. Now, this is not to say that our Wall Street shitbags aren't still shitbags. They are. They're still shitbags. And they're still the most, they're only the second worst group of people on the planet.
It's like the devil, basically.
Right. Or at the very least, the devil that understands we can't do this anymore. Different than when Paul Volcker had to do what he did in the late 1970s and early 1980s to save the dollar. He did it for the same reasons that Jerome Powell is doing it today, because the offshore dollar markets had destroyed the domestic dollar markets. Nothing new.
Well, and ask yourself, look at the history of the euro dollar markets, right?
Sure.
That is basically to export our inflation, to make the military industrial complex, pharma complex, banking complex, untold sums of money, and to export our wealth and route it back to these people. Right. And this illusion of raising rates. Now, I'm critical of maybe the motivations behind how Powell could be breaking, because I think that while you're right on the history of cartels separating them, pointing their guns at each other,
right,
I think that the problems I have with that analysis is that I actually think that Boney, Citi, Jamie Dimon, they're not down with the CBDC stuff, and so the Fed, look at who's participating in this demo with the 12 other banks. JP Morgan's not in there,
right?
And because what happens if CBDC goes live is there's no more banks. Right. They'll do the bail-in, and people who have above whatever threshold, similar to Argentina, which has done that multiple times in the last couple of decades, you'll have a bail-in, and then you'll go exactly to the social credit score, ASG, blah, 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 that China has done. Now, I know people are afraid of that. I'm really not, Tom, because the people are fucking morons. You think they know how to run a permission node network? No way. They may get to where you replace Swift with some settlement layer that's a quasi CBDC.
Right.
But they're never, I really don't see them getting to the point where it's in a hot wallet like it's Bitcoin, and you have 90 days to spend it, and you can't buy more than 2 pounds of meat a week. Blah. I really don't see that as a probability.
I don't either. And so I'm not at all worried about this latest Fed thing. I've always said, when people got worried about this, is to talk to me about pilot project, right? When they use the word pilot project, then it can get serious. But at the same time, there's also the big difference between a wholesale central bank digital currency versus the retail central bank.
Correct.
Huge difference. And I can tell you, I've listened to every recent interview with Daniel DiMartino Booth, she said the same thing, that they're not down with it. I've talked to patrons who are, placed within the banking system. They're all like, yeah, no, this is not what's happening. Like, do they want to have a replacement for Swift that is not retarded because Swift is literally telex and 100 years old? Like, seriously, it's retarded that we still
how has it not already been replaced?
Right, how is it not already been replaced? Why are we still on a T+3 settlement system? Like, why are we on any of this stuff when we have all this? Well,
I can answer part of that.
Okay, cool.
Because between T and 3, we make all kinds of shenanigans happen.
Of course,
via the repo market.
But that's what I mean. But technologically speaking, logically speaking, there's absolutely no reason for any of this, and therefore, you, of course, as if something logical has not happened, then you should ask the question why and who benefits from it, because obviously someone's skimming. It's the same reason why the American banks were indexed to LIBOR up until January. Like, why was any of this going on? Well, because we were a captured friggin' pawn to the British Crown, who never wanted to give up control over our banking system. What else is freaking new?
Yeah, I mean, City of London.
Obviously. And even City of London, I've talked to other people about this. They're like, and I got news for you. Even City of London is not monolithic about what's going on. Half of the banks, just like on Wall Street, half of the banks want out of the stupid Davos shit, and the other half don't. And the other half signed up for it. And it's a fight, and there's a fight going on and we see it as a political fight, and it looks contradictory and weird and stupid, and it doesn't make any sense. But that's because the cartel's breaking, and you now have to go in granularly and figure out who's on what side of that of this what used to be a big club that we weren't in.
And now it's a smaller club run by all psychopaths. Back in the day, there was some gentlemen left, right? They weren't all psycho and sociopaths. But you're where I'm able to defend that analysis on your end is that there's a very clear separation between Bank International Settlements and the Federal Reserve.
Yes,
right, 100%. I mean, these people in the ECB, and I don't have social media, but I know that they tweeted the end of Bitcoin. Something.
Yeah, that was this morning,
right? And whereas Gensler and Powell, I'm not big fans of theirs, but Bitcoin is a commodity, which is what it is, right?
I don't believe. I believe Gensler is just running interference for Davos and for Yellen personally.
Yeah, and I, full disclosure, took the course that he taught on blockchain at MIT. I, can spot a liar and a hypocrite from far away, and I don't know how people of such poor ethics and values, and people who are clearly untrustworthy and then incompetent, can be advisors to the Clintons, to be teachers at one of the greatest institutions on earth as far as collegiate learning centers, where before all of this BS, I would honestly love my kids to go to MIT or Georgia Tech, Vatech. Those are great skills that children and people coming in the workforce need to have. But now I'll tell you the two colleges they're not going to go, Stanford and MIT, and that's because of this stuff. And anyways, where I was going with that is that I definitely agree with you that there are bifurcations within the central banks that do answer all to Bank of International Settlements, and there's a more sense of urgency and militancy about this. You're going to own nothing and like it, coming out of Davos and Bank of International Settlements, where what's bifurcated away from them from City of London, Wall Street is, wait a minute, guys, how the fuck are we going to make any money if you guys do this? They're like, wait, I'm not down for this. And so I agree with you that, they're separating, there's fracturing, and the banks don't want to just be CBDC'd out of existence, right?
It makes no sense. And it really is and if you really back it up one step further, it's an ideological fight, right?
But are they controlled opposition, Tom?
No, I don't think so. I just don't think so. I really don't, because I mean, look, it really comes down to, are we going to have private capital formation or are we going to have public capital formation? And there comes a point where even the mega banks understand that, one, the community banks have to have their purpose in the system, and they would rather continue to get their vig off of a deflated old system, of the old system that's been rebooted in some way, than what the German Nazis are talking about. And I like Schwab's a freaking Nazi, dude. It's just that simple.
I mean, he's worse. He's a communist.
What's that?
He's worse. He's a communist.
Yeah, well, yeah.
They're worse.
He's not just a communist; he's a Malthusian and a eugenicist and all the rest of it. So you like I'm happy to say they're all just commies, dude. It's all just commies all the way down the line. But ultimately when I parse this through, I'm like, yeah, no. I mean, I still think that guys like Powell and Diamond and others still believe that if we're going to have any kind of rational allocation of capital, it has to be done through the commercial banking system, even if they have their thumb on the scale of who gets the lion's share of the profits from that commercial banking system, which of course they're going to, argue for and they're going to set up for themselves. Fine. At this point, as bad as they are, these guys are worse because they literally want to either kill everybody off or make everybody serfs, where we and we reduce energy usage by 90%. And like you don't have a world. That's not a world that even that Diamond wants to rule over. It's not a world that Powell wants to. Even if you ascribe if you ascribe the same God complex to Jamie Dimon that George Soros has, if you just take the two of them put them on opposite sides of the fence and ask yourself, okay, do they both have equally egregiously large egos? It's not a bad assumption. No. Now ask yourself the question, does Diamond really want to lord over, a king of the empire and be king of the empire? Or would he rather be king of a much larger empire, right? Of a colony that, spans the globe. I argue for that. And to me, it seems like very obvious that the Fed has the opportunity here, not that these people have overshot. They've overshot their wad. They've oversold it, and now and Wall Street has the Fed. They still have the control over the most powerful currency in the world, other than Bitcoin, and they can use that as a means by which to run the table on them. And they're going to run the table on them. I don't see how, other than like literally shooting Powell or blowing up Diamond, I don't see how they get this done. So thanks to the miracle of technology and editing and, well, frankly, the unreliability of some technology, as in my wonky internet service, I'm going to take a break here and let corporate America try to sell you its wretched things, and we'll be right back. And we're back. So after that, so what do you think, Chris? Like, I mean, I understand that you have reservations about even viewing any of these guys as good guys, but if you look at the God complex between Diamond and someone like Soros, you gotta believe at a certain level that Diamond would rather lord over a massive ant pile as opposed to, or a massive ant colony than a little ant pile in your backyard. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I my father actually put a thought in my head that I think is really relevant. Like when you break men down to their base instincts, right? We're all not that different. And he said, remember, Jamie's half Greek, and remember the Greek bloodline still has that fire of patriotism and decentralization and honor in it. And I agree with him. And if I were in the same situation, whether it's self-preservation, God complex, or innate sense of, wait, I'm okay with, usury, but I'm not okay with the destruction of the planet.
Right.
And, they all know it's a ruse. Like we've had as a professional institutional hedge fund business, we've had to deal with this ESG shit constantly. I wrote, and I'll send you this, Tom, because you'll love it. I wrote a 43-page dissertation mocking the whole thing because I've been a surfer my whole life and a fisherman in Florida. We, as you probably know with your friends and family, commercial fishermen are like the most holistically beneficial environmental participants on Earth. Right. Same as the loggers out west and up north. And there's nothing that helps the environment out of ESG. In fact, ironically, BlackRock closed their big ESG fund yesterday.
Yeah, because I'm sure that someone finally sat Larry Fink down and said, "Oh, by the way, if you don't want to lose your company, dude, like if you want to lose your company, stay associated with Klaus Schwab." That's the biggest tell of the bunch. When Fink kept coming out and saying, "Well, we might have to rethink this ESG," or he tried to double down. He tried to double down the early rate hikes. And then he had another meeting with Powell, and so many people turned to me and they said, come on, man. He's like, Larry Fink's met with Powell privately 8 times and blah, 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 blah. And that just means that they're all in coots together. I'm like, really? So you don't think that Larry Fink, sitting on $38 billion worth of shareholder capital, I've mentioned many times, after just doing a cursory balance sheet analysis of BlackRock, on $400 billion a year in asset management fees, right? Asset management revenue of around somewhere between 360 and $400 billion a year. They do 90 to 100 billion a quarter, with only $38 billion worth of shareholder equity, and went hog wild buying U.S. commercial and residential real estate when they got access to the discount window directly, because that's their superpower thanks to the CARES Act. You don't tell me that when Fink walks into Powell's office, Powell, who is the most powerful man in the world, period, didn't turn to Fink and say, suck Satan's cock?
It's probably
you think Fink went to Powell and said, you work for me? Really? On what planet do you live? Because I know what planet I live on. And I know that if I'm Powell, I tell Fink his business.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's cornered into having to do that at this point, right, Tom, because when we left off, what my team and I have discussed is like, okay, so if Powell and let's just call them the Patriot investors, right? Patriot Investment Group, because they're on their way out of the cabal. If we're operating under that assumption, what the commie Davos-based group can do is, what if they tell all of the imbecile politicians of the Western nations, go back to the central bank and default on what you owe them?
Sure.
So then, I mean, arguably that doesn't matter because they can just control P whatever they want on this centralized ledger that they have. Right. But there's just ways where that, and I hope that happens, because so many people are just so narrow-minded. They're not educated properly. In fact, mis and diseducated, and
maleducated.
Maleducated was the word. Thank you. Miseducated was what I was looking for. They don't understand what a central bank is. They don't understand what fiat is. They don't understand why they're working harder for less. They're not aware of why the politicians aren't working for them. They're not even fucking aware that we're not a democracy. You see all this, it's the end of democracy. Well, first off, every democracy has ended. And then lastly, we are a constitutional republic.
And they all have ended too, badly.
Also,
because there's only a slightly worse form of government than direct democracy. Yeah, they all suck. Remember, anarcho-libertarian on this end of the connection. I'm what I mean? Like, at this point, I'm like, so yeah, I mean, this they all suck. But no, you're absolutely right. So it's interesting you bring that up. I want to let's go into that a little bit further. So, because I'm always interested in point counterpoint. I'm a big board gamer. I'm a big grand strategy kind of guy, right? So Davos's big next move, of course, is to continue to leverage their political power that they currently have, which is why they had to, massage the midterm election results in order to retain as much power over Congress as possible, because it's Congress versus the Fed, right? Because that's one of the angles here. And so, walk me through what you guys were thinking about in terms of, well, what if they just, say that we're not going to pay you back? We're going to default on what they owe you.
Yeah. Treasury has the ability to go back to the Fed and give them the finger. And so of the 33 trill of bonds, so forget unfunded liabilities, because honestly, those aren't going to ever get funded. So, it just is like, Obama dipped into the trust. It's all gone. It's a shame what happened, but this is what the public deserves to suffer through by not voting in people with ethics and character. But so what is available to Congress to do to maybe unlock a little bit of value and to bring back some maybe issuing authority or some consideration, is to go to the Fed and say, well, you own 9 trillion, 10 trillion, 8 trillion, whatever it is. We're just not going to pay that back, and we're not going to pay the interest on it.
Okay. It's only it's about 2.6 trillion, I think, or something like that. Is it? No, it's less. It's bigger than that. That's right.
Yeah. And what it's likely is we have no idea. Like, let's be honest. Yeah. I mean, we're never going to get to audit.
So the Treasury can do that, and the Fed and the Fed can turn around and go, "That's nice. We'll just revalue our gold reserves at at par, and then and oh, by the way, we'll just tell JP Morgan to stop sitting on the gold price, and we'll send it to $6,000 an ounce.
Try 20
or 20 or whatever. I mean, honestly, to balance those numbers, it's not really, it is what it is, but they have that option.
And then they have that option. What I would love to see that happen, because who I would rather have make decisions that would affect my children and grandchildren is Mr. Powell, because if they do that, that will be the Fed's response. And then that handcuffs the shit out of the cesspool that is Washington.
Of course. Like, this is why none of these bluffs are ever called. This is why when Pelosi, again, I bring this back up again, when Pelosi tied all three big votes in 2021, Build Back Better, the infrastructure bill, and the debt ceiling, and tied them all together, when she had a majority in both friggin' houses to get them all done, she knew she didn't actually have a majority. Mm-hmm. That was the big tell, because Powell and Diamond and the rest of them were standing behind Manchin and Sinema going, don't worry about it, they're not going to kill your kids. Well, in Sinema's case, we're not going to out you for being a lesbian or whatever. We're not. No one's going to die that's close to you. You do this, we've got your back. You shut this Harriet up, and we can get this done. Just run the clock out on them. Wait for the inflation that we know is coming to show up. That undercuts the entire political argument as to why we need all this spending. And then, which is why Pelosi was like, well, okay, we're gonna run this thing out until the debt ceiling, and we'll shame the Republicans into voting for all of it. And she failed. And Pelosi is like, she's one of the greatest speakers of all time. As much as she's a fucking horrible human being, that makes her a great speaker. And she couldn't get it. And she couldn't get it done with a majority, with everybody in the world behind her. She couldn't get it done. That tells you the level of power that was arrayed against her at that moment in time. Mm-hmm. And that was the biggest tell to me. When Manchin came out and just said, nope, not voting for Build Back Better, I'm like, oh, I'm so right about Powell. And now he's draining the Eurodollar markets, and now he's going after Lagarde. Like, I can just see it. I can see it.
I think so. Where do you input who he answers to? Because the BIS is one governance,
node. Yeah, it's one node.
One node.
Right.
But it's the equity owners of the Federal Reserve that Powell ultimately answers to, and most of them are European-based families.
That's true. But we're also talking about a lot of New York money center banks as well.
6,
right?
Yeah.
Well, and which ones are they? The ones we've identified. The ones we've identified that have stronger balance sheets than the ones over in Europe.
The ones the funny part not invited to the New York Times event today, Tom.
And not invited to the New York Times event today. Exactly. The big question here is, but the Rothschilds are big shareholders in the Federal Reserve, but are they bigger shareholders than Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan? I mean, again, I've been arguing this point that maybe this really is the last gasp for true American independence. That the American Revolution only started the independence of North America from old colonial Europe. Okay.
And really that was fighting the same central banks then. It's the entire struggle the world has had.
Yeah, right? Exactly. With the rise of China. Okay. Now China's got its own problems, and we can, I'm not going to be turned into a China shill or anything, but China has their own problems, but China understands the problem. So do the Russians, and so do the Iranians. And those are civilizations. They are not systems.
Right.
Okay. And because they're civilizations, you can't pressure a civilization into collapse through external pressure that way. You can pressure systems into collapse. Fair. We keep using systemic tools to collapse civilizations. When you do that, civilizations retrench, get authoritarian, and say, nope, sorry, the mullahs may suck, Putin may be terrible, Xi may be horrible, but he's our horrible, he's our terrible, and he's our suck, and he's not you. Fuck off. Yep. And that's what we're experiencing here. Mm-hmm. And they can take as much of, and then they can take that, and then all they got to do is keep proving to the world that, look at what happens when you tell them no in the most mild way imaginable. They lose their freaking minds. And now you actually have enough capital that you don't have to say, you don't have to
You
go
know,
along with them anymore.
well,
So
I
that's
think
why the Saudis are so important, why the Indians are so important, why what's happening in Pakistan is so important.
in
All of this.
Brazil,
Brazil.
same. Yeah.
Yeah. Bolsonaro is gonna walk back into office and he's gonna put Lula in jail. I
I
think.
it's I mean, and that was another WEF Soros led
Of course it was.
bullshit. Anyways, we have Brazilian clients and friends, and obviously a lot of Brazilians live right here in Central Florida.
Mm-hmm.
They're all beside themselves. I mean, it's the same as 2020 or what just happened for the midterms,
Right.
just at a even more egregious level, because the supporter side of Lula was literally cartels, World Economic Forum, et cetera. None of your regular folks in Brazil
Right.
supported that guy. What did he go to jail for, Tom? And then one Supreme Court justice there pardoned him to get him out to run. Like what? I mean,
how yeah, and what's really interesting, and again, like I want to go back into blockchain on this. I want to like bring this back around in the time we have left before we run out of time. So, which is that this is why I keep looking at the situation with FTX and I keep asking the question who and why, and I cannot for the life of me. I can't make a strong enough argument that Davos would have blown up their their new money printing system, because you made a point earlier that I want to go all the way back to, because it was a very interesting one, because it's one I've heard in other places, which is that crypto, not Bitcoin, but crypto was getting close to escape velocity in terms of attracting capital. And if so, then nothing the Fed did at that point would, in terms of trying to pull back on offshore dollar liquidity, would have mattered, because the dollar would have now been virtualized through the crypto system. So tell me what you think about that idea and where we're going.
There's a lot at play there, because you've got the stable coins, which I despise, the same as I despise over financialized derivatives or over financialized anything. And that has helped the Fed, right? Because no one's doing trade finance with yen and euro in the blockchain system, right?
Right.
Tether, which arguably is a better central bank than the Fed.
Sure.
Let's be honest. And then USDC, which is Circle, Goldman, blah, blah, blah. GUSD, which is with State Street. And, this is perpetuating the dollar. And I think it's bought the dollar life and time.
I agree.
Right. And so I think that you've got the very possible, plausible, and probable rug pull by the incentives that were there on the central banking side. But then there's so many complexities at work here that I tie them into the taxonomy where this all kicked off. This is ironically the only bear cycle within crypto that has not had anything to do with crypto / Bitcoin. This is all centralized players beginning in May, going bust, and then June. And you can see they had the same political persuasion. They had the same VC backers. They had the same education backgrounds and friend and associate circles, same advisory circles, propagandized into fame. Meanwhile, there are superhuman blockchain cryptography teams that no one's ever heard of, and then 3 of our compatriots that were suicided, died, or whatever in the last few weeks, including the founder of Maker and Amber, and then anyways. And so I think you've got very, very obvious money laundering. You've got, which speaks to your point on why would the Euro and administration want to stop that gravy train where, hey, we're sending you US taxpayer dollars, and then, oh, thanks, Zelensky, send it back to our PACs. That was going on for years, right?
Right.
So you're right to assume that maybe they weren't the rug pullers, right? And I would like to get into the taxonomy of how this all led to FTX, right? You mentioned quasi purchasing all of these other shitty CeFi companies. I'm back and forth on whether that was to further depress everything purposefully, knowing that there was going to be this outcome, right? Because now I don't know that off the top of my head, but we're in the 13,000 job losses already just off this last few weeks. So it's probably going to end up being 30 or 40 losses, untold sums of lost revenues that were in queue for Q4, Q1, et cetera, for all of the crypto associated companies, even ours. And then no competition left.
Exactly. You hoover them all up, you take all the cash, you do and then, but if you can keep the last one from imploding. Remember, I've said for a long time, you could taper a Ponzi scheme as long as you're the biggest Ponzi. right? Because then all
That's
the
the
littler
rules.
Ponzi's get rolled up into you. I said this about the Federal Reserve. Well, at the beginning of the year when I was talking about the Fed, whether the Fed could raise interest rates, and everybody said, "Well, you can't taper a Ponzi." I'm like, "Yeah, you can. If you're
They did
the
it way longer
Ponzi,
than they did it way longer.
you don't have to be." You don't have to be the fastest guy outrunning the bear. You just have to be faster than the other guy, or you have to be bigger than the other guy. And so that can roll itself up. Now, there's no bigger Ponzi effectively than the Federal Reserve. In the crypto space, they were trying to clearly build FTX up into that. And if they could get escape velocity in terms of credibility of that system, doesn't matter whether it's a Ponzi scheme. The Federal Reserve is a Ponzi scheme that has unearned credibility. So this emerges as the direct competitor in the crypto space, controlled by Davos or whoever you want to call it. And it was clear that it was now being a self-sustaining thing and a new form of self-sustaining offshore dollar liquidity, even though there's not a dollar in the system. It's already your prototypical retail central bank digital currency. Now, do I think the Fed is? I can see the Fed having problems with every bit of this. And Powell even came out and said a year and a half ago or so, he said, "Look, I don't have a problem with Bitcoin, but I do have a problem with stable coins." So now let's ask a question. Everybody has been doing the Tether FUD for years. What if, and we don't know this, but what if, and I don't know this, and I'd love to hear counter arguments to this, but what if Tether's balance sheet, which always in the past was very shady, what if it is still very shady? But what if the people who are backing Tether with the $67 billion it needs in liquidity is actually the Fed? What if the Fed is the one who's got the offshore accounts of the and Tether's fully backed by USTs through intermediaries, and with the reason we can't get an insight into Tether's balance sheet is because Powell and the Fed understand, and Morgan and the rest of them understand, that Bitcoin's liquidity and Bitcoin's validity as an alternative asset to Davos rests on Tether's the ability to be able to trade against a stable coin. So pick one.
It's without question the best,
and without question the best.
And to your point, that is actually the only likely scenario to support it not being just another abject fraud, right? And
why it's actually survived, and why Letitia James gave it gave them the slap on the wrist in the Southern District of New York. And controlled and owned and operated as a fully wholly owned subsidiary of JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and all the other big New York banks.
Yeah. I mean, even if you assume like they're half collateralized, Tom, right, that's still better than every single bank on the planet. Exactly. If it's 5% collateralized, it's still better than every single bank on the planet. Right. Oh, and you know what? I'm going to do you one better, because that token and that technology on that chain also has value, right? So wait a minute. If it's backed by some bullshit fiat, which is the biggest bullshit ever, and then I've got the tech rails to go, wait, infinite trading in seconds. Wait a minute. I'm now way the F better.
Wow. I didn't even actually think about Tether as a technology having. Of course it is. But of course it is good, has real value.
So isn't that better than just fiat by itself? Of course it is.
Of course it is. Because now it's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's even a prototypical replacement for what we talked about earlier.
Well, and here I'm not a big fan of stablecoins, right? Because I think Bitcoin's a stablecoin, but I'll give you a great example. There were producers during COVID coming out of Malaysia and Thailand and Indonesia that were trade financing their shipping because rates and banks, all of that got jammed up. Nobody was going to work, and their cost of capital was 6.25%. They were able to finance getting shit to the banks of Los Angeles in Long Beach, right? We know of clients of ours out of Southeast Asia and various other firms that were doing that on top of Tether.
Right. Makes perfect sense.
By the way, they actually were saving 300-400 bips by not going through the banking system any damn way. So that's the use case that we saw real time to get us commodities and finished goods out of Asia.
Wow. No, this is good. This is really good, Chris. Thank you, because these ideas have been popping through my head for a couple of weeks now, and one of my patrons threw a note up on our private discussion server saying, "Look, I'm going to do the deep dive. I'm going to get you to the deep dive eventually, but right now I'm telling you, Tether's actually backed by U.S. Treasury, fully backed by U.S. Treasuries, and most likely backed by the Fed." And he didn't say anything. He didn't give any more granularity than that. He said, I'll give you the rest of it later. I'm like, okay. And then I thought about it for 5 seconds and I went, of course. And
wouldn't
then
that be what you would do if you were them?
Yeah, of course it would be. I would take Tether over,
Mhm.
especially after the judgment against Tether in the Southern District of New York, which now ties them directly. Now Tether's whole life is owned by that court ruling. That can be opened back up. They can do whatever they want. They own Tether at that point.
Well, and the people who set that up, Tom, here I'll give you another pearl. The FUD that's behind Tether, right, is to create, angst on the crypto space in general, but also to keep people's money potentially out. But here's mechanically what would happen. Assume that they shut it down. Right. The Southern District of New York just says, all right, enough. We've had our fun. Now we're going to do our own thing. JP Morgan coin or whatever the hell.
Right.
Well, what happens mechanically? Right. That doesn't make Bitcoin tank. That makes every single liquid crypto go up 8x instantly, because then what happens is it flips from USDT into first Bitcoin, second Ethereum, third Avalanche, fourth, just walk it down.
Into all of those platforms, as well as all of the Bitcoin, the proof of work Bitcoin equivalents.
Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, etc.
Like Monero,
Zcash,
like all the good ones, Pirachain, all the good ones, like regardless of whether you think Pirachain are a bunch of crooks or not.
So you think they want
to? Those are use case proof of work coins that matter and whose chains have value. Have you noticed how well Monero was held up during all of this?
It's my favorite. No. So Bit and Monero are my personal favorite assets, and then Avalanche is my personal favorite layer one.
Yeah, mine too.
And I separate, like, at layer ones, layer twos have utility use cases, but they're more equity-esque. And then you have chains that are commodities, right? And they're assets. That's totally different than investment and then asset. You've got two different strategies, and I employ, a separation of those. And I think it's important to know the taxonomy differentials, right?
I agree. Agreed.
It's like, wait a minute, I own 4 ETFs, I'm diversified. No, you don't. You own 50% Apple. So well, shit, I hate Tim Cook. And so you got to dive into the underlying, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so I think they're aware of that, Tom. And then, of course, Boney and JP and Fidelity et al. That are getting into this space rapidly, the bear's not affecting them. That's actually making them move quicker. You think they want Bitcoin to rip to 200,000 before they're in the space?
No. Of course they want, their mining rigs aren't set up and co-located at all the nuclear power plants and all the gas flaring stations around the country and all the rest of it. Of course. I have a friend of mine, old friend of mine, who is in the nuclear sales business, right? The sales business. He's in the marketing for the nuclear industry. And a year and a half ago, he turned to his boss and he said, I'd like to do the whole marketing for Bitcoin thing, with nuclear power plants. And he's like, and his boss like, yeah, whatever. And literally would get 10 minutes into his presentation and they were like, okay, where's the contract?
Right.
He didn't even have to do his elevator pitch. And they were already like, where's the contract? I heard this from him multiple times over the last year and a half. So this is a big deal. That the hash rate coming onshoring, the hash rate here in the United States is a big deal. The CHIPS Act is bringing a bleeding edge. You think that that 3 nanometer plant that TSMC is going to build in Texas is just for making iPhones?
Who do you think created the chip shortage? The crypto market, not phones. I mean, give me a freaking break. Like, phones are such low obsolescence tech. It's amazing they've addicted people to them. Right. And I agree with Bill Maher. They're just pathways to evil, in my opinion. But I think the summation here is that if you're believing the FUD coming out of the mainstream media, you're totally ignoring all of the deep, real capital behind this space. Like, wait, so Bitcoin's a Ponzi. Wait, why is Exxon doing Bitcoin mining? Why are nuclear power plants in upstate New York doing Bitcoin mining? What they've been doing the solar flares, which is recycling and green, and then off the volcano in El Salvador. That would not occur for bullshit.
No, it would not.
The good old boys at Exxon would not be stoked about mining Bitcoin if they weren't sold hook, line, and sinker. And that's what's so fantastic about Bitcoin as an asset and as a movement, because it's the tip of the, let's call it, non-violent sword.
Of course.
It's a silent rebellion. And then anybody who spends any time on it, it's like, oh my God, this is part of the answer. There's no one end all.
Thank God. I'm like, because it's so hard to get through the Bitcoin maxi. Like, guys, we're going to need more than 21 million coins to liquefy the world. I got news for you. I just hate to tell you this, but I can look at the world today and I'm like, you're going to replace that system with 21 million coins. It's not going to happen.
Well, here's what it can do, in my opinion, and why I'm never planning on selling any of mine. And I'm just accumulating as much as I possibly can. I love this. The current price is just such a gift, especially around Christmas.
It is. It's a gift.
And because trust is such a problem, whether systemic, societal, relationships, Bitcoin is the collateral of the planet.
Yes.
It is the trust layer of the planet. And because there is only 21 million, its primary function of trust and truth through code is absolutely what it's going to be used for. And people critique, oh, it's only every 10 minutes. That sort of frequency is what will cement it as that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've argued. I remember even Elon Musk has said, like, Bitcoin is rock stupid technology, and I'm like, yeah, and that's one of its greatest assets. That's one of its greatest assets.
And even calling he knows better than to call.
Yeah, he was doing. He's not. I mean, no, I understand that, but he was actually making that point as well. Well, which is but it's the rock stupid technology we need right now.
Yet every hacker on the planet's tried to hack it for 12 years and they can't. So how stupid is the tech on it? It's
no, I don't mean in terms of that's not, when I say rock stupid, I mean the parameters of it, the initial parameters and setups and everything. There are blockchains out there, proof of work blockchains, that are more sophisticated for doing various different things, and that's why they may be better in the long run than Bitcoin. But who cares? Right now, you need Bitcoin as the foundational trust layer, as you put it, the collateral for the new monetary system. And I know that I've said this in multiple interviews. I said, it's two things that can happen here. We've already discussed one possibility of why the Fed would want a rising gold price. And I've got another good reason for that, which is obviously if they want to try and dig us out of a fiscal hole, they can throw the treasury gold out on the yield curve and then fund that
would be hilarious.
It would be. No, that's what Judy Shelton wanted to do when they put it. That's what she was going to do. Like, issue 50 or 100-year bonds with a 5% gold redemption clause, and then they could issue a 2% cover, a 2% dollar coupon rate on a bond, but pay investors 15 and 18% a year in rising gold. And this way, the Fed is now incentivized to allow the price of gold to rise. That's one. The damage demographically has already been done thanks to the freaking clock shot. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but got news for you. Everybody's unfunded liabilities have to be recalculated to the downside because a lot of people are going to die over the next 5 years. And excess debts is not going to go away anytime soon. And it's horrific, and it's tragic, and it's terrible, and it's awful, and it's immoral, and it's the biggest evil ever perpetrated against the humanity, yada, yada, yada. But it's also reality. Now, let's take it one step further. I've also said there's going to come a time in the future when the Fed is going to have to put Bitcoin on its balance sheet.
Because they don't trust anybody else.
Because it's a certain level for the dollar to survive.
Yep.
Or some version of the dollar to survive.
But so because Powell, as much as I hate all central bankers,
right,
Lagarde is a special kind of dangerous.
Yes, she is.
Right. And Kuroda, he's not there anymore, but those might be even worse than that. But so they're going to have to protect themselves against their own cartel at some point.
Yes.
And funny little fiat on a centralized ledger that they're in the Swift system, that ain't going to protect them from it, right? And that's why you're seeing
nothing can protect Lagarde.
Why did the New York Fed desk rehypothecate most of the gold to their control, right?
Right.
It wouldn't surprise me if we continue to see the accumulation of precious metals, and then all of a sudden you're going to be like, who the hell is buying 100,000 Bitcoin right now? And it pushes it to 30,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because as of yesterday,
they did it previously in order to build this FTX Ponzi scheme.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty clear that the same people who built FTX were also the ones pumping Bitcoin from 14,000 to 68,000 and then down again. And we all fell for it because of the previous iterations of as Bitcoin's total addressable market went up. They just amplified it. Like Bitcoin's previous price rises, I think, in the previous halvings, were a function of just finding a new total addressable market. Like every time the TAM of Bitcoin went up by an order of magnitude, so did the price. It's not hard to figure out. Like that's not difficult, or and so
no, and that relationship's linear,
right? And that relationship is linear,
right,
and it is what it is, and it overshoots, and there's manias, and there's troughs, and all the rest of it. But the trend line is pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. But this last one was different because of the advent during 2017, 2018, with the advent of off-chain settled Bitcoin futures, which then they could now start running the Ponzi scheme. And remember, with gold, they can run the Ponzi scheme in both directions. They always do. They will take gold up and then they will take it down. They will take silver up and they will take it down. Jim Sinclair warned us all back in 2003, 2004, 2005. The very people you hate today for suppressing the price of gold are going to be the ones that make most of the money on the next gold bull market. Get over yourselves. Trade the 60% of every trend wave that comes out, and you'll make a scat of money, and you'll actually make more than them on a percentage basis. But you can't beat them.
No. And no tree grows to heaven, right?
Right. And no tree grows to heaven, and pigs get slaughtered. So do your due diligence, leave 20% at the top and the bottom of the God agreed, capture the 60% in the middle, and be happy with it.
Be grateful, right?
Be grateful you were able to even see it and then get it. And if you can do that, do that more often than you don't. You'll be
It's
great.
A perfect hedge to, I'm going to accumulate spot to protect my asset base, and I'm going to trade paper in exactly the fashion you just mentioned. That sounds like a reasonable idea. Nobody does that though. People are so, tribal and bifurcated in like this dogma that, man, we keep repeating the same over and over and over.
Well, it's because as these, remember, they are anxiety pimps, as my partner Dexter White likes to term them. And every time I use that term, I either owe him $1 or I owe him credit, because it is the perfect term for this. And they create and decreate bubbles and manias, and psychological bubbles and manias within markets over and over and over again, because they have control of the megaphone. Now, that anxiety is what fuels people's tribalism, because the worse you feel the uncertainty of the future, the more you have to hold on to that which you understand and that which you know.
Right.
So gold only bugs like Peter Schiff can't see the value of Bitcoin. The people like me who see the value in both cannot. They hate me. Both sides hate me. The Bitcoin maxis hate me, and the gold only bugs hate me. And
right, and neither
the only one in the middle going, look, just buy both, and just buy both, and buy the dollar when it's in a bull market, and get over yourself.
And even like gentlemen shouldn't hate, right? That's a strong word for it. Shows like, oh, I'm a pompous ass that can't be rationed with or reasoned with.
Right. Exactly.
And then wait a minute, Bitcoin is part of the answer, and then gold has a history. I'm going to be a stupid investor and not do both. I still buy bullion.
Right.
I know Bitcoin's. I'm not planning to make any money off of gold. Like that's how dumb I am. But that doesn't stop me from accumulating more.
And it doesn't. And it also doesn't. You got to remember that just because you see the world that way and you see the end game one way, doesn't mean that the rest of the world sees the end game and the intervening 15 steps to get to end game the same way you do. So we're going to go through a whole bunch of stuff where there's going to be a whole lot of people who, by the way, won't be allowed to invest in Bitcoin, but they will be allowed to invest in gold. Okay, because before the Fed ever anoints Bitcoin as a balance sheet asset, they're going to revalue their gold holdings first. So why don't you be smart and say, oh, look, $1,700 gold, maybe I should buy some. It's just that simple. Chris, we're running out of time here. This has been brilliant. It's been wonderful. We're definitely going to have to do this again.
Sure.
I It's fantastic. Thank you very much for your time. So give people an idea of what you do, or if you want, you can plug away, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, I'm luckily not good at shameless plugging, but we are open to friends and fellow LPs take a look if our investment thesis makes sense for them. But I'm at hyperiondecimus.com. HYPERIONDECIMUS.com. We are US Cayman traditional hedge fund structure, but generally I'm just here to have fun with my friends like you. But I do think diving into a little bit of the taxonomy of the underpinnings of FTX that we didn't get to this time would be worthy and lead us down more fun paths like we did today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. And I'll have links to the Chris's stuff for anybody who's interested. And we'll do this again soon. So, Chris, you have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, that'll about put a bow on episode 124 of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. If you like what you heard today, give a like, give a subscribe, pass it off to your friends, do the thing, right? As always, you can follow me on my blog at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. You can also sign up for the Patreon service at Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns, where we do twice weekly market reports, private blog posts, and a retail investor newsletter, which is intended to help you at least survive, if not thrive, the chaotic times we live in. So with all that said, you guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.